Chapter 9 Villa Centross, London, England, May 28th, 1889. Dr. Quakeson rapped their knuckles on the wooden door to Villa Centross. In truth, the home was villa in name only, yet the naming convention seemed to amuse its sole resident. Located on the outskirts of London, the sprawling property housed numerous buildings, all of which lay in various states of connection and disrepair, and all of which were constructed and subsequently occupied solely by David Centross Misvale. The upside of the unnecessarily large home, and likely the reason for its haphazard construction, was that it allowed plenty of room for the various hobbies and experiments David was accustomed to throwing himself into wholeheartedly. Whenever something new sparked his interest as a naturalist, it would occupy his entire mind, the man eager to banish all other thoughts from his head and focus solely on the single goal. Sherbet had often wondered where David found the money to build such a home. Surely the large inheritance allocated by David's family, whom he still, after all these years, refused to speak of, had long ago dried up. Then again, Sherbet was not entirely sure how wealthy the Misvale family had once been. Sherbet knocked again, checking their pocket watch to mark how long they had been waiting. After once again receiving no response, they assumed, rightfully so, that one of these periods of intense fascination must have once again enthralled David, and Sherbet allowed themselves inside without invitation. Entering through the front door, the visitor was greeted by a sprawling atrium, decorated in the faux Roman style which pervaded much of the estate. Sherbet was shocked to discover that the grass of the open-air courtyard was filled with row upon row of beehives, both man-made cubes arranged in orderly rows of white-slatted wood, and naturally created hives, hanging from walls and columns, their yellow and brown husks affixed to the masonry by its buzzing inhabitants. The sheer amount of bees present in the area filled the air with a deafening hum, which explained why David, who was standing in the centre of the atrium, had failed to hear the knocking on his front door mere feet away. Sherbet waited patiently by the door, trying to avoid the multitude of yellow insects, and not even bothering to speak over the noise. They simply watched David inspect the hives, calming the bees with smoke as he went until the naturalist finally noticed them. "Sherbet!" David shouted over the noise, weaving his way between the hives to greet them at the door. "What a pleasure to see you! To what do I owe this visit?" David's voice was muffled slightly by the mesh surrounding his face, his gentle accent twisting the words further still. He began to take off the thick gloves of his beekeeper suit. "I organized to pick up some more samples of that mold today," Sherbet shouted over the noise. "Don't you remember? We planned it all out. At Bumboos, 2 days ago. You didn't forget already, did you?" David blinked, a puzzled expression clouding his broad face. 2 days? No, that was yesterday, wasn't it? The 26th. Wait, no. Yes. No. David furrowed his brow. What day is it today? Today is the 28th, David. David looked around himself, and then back at Sherbet, and then up at the sky, as if by simply checking the position of the sun he could verify this was in fact true. Shit. I must have lost track of time. I did tell you that spore was fascinating, didn't I? Used to get caught up in studying it, I suppose. He forced a smile. There's something familiar about it that I can't put my finger on. I know I spent a few hours down there looking at it last night, but... David shook his head, dislodging the strange feeling building in the back of his skull, dispelling the bizarre whispering voice hidden in the humming of the bees. Anyway, it's not important, I suppose. Follow me. He waved Sherbet through a side door out of the atrium, and proceeded to continue removing his beekeeper's suit, revealing the purple shirt underneath, stuck to his back with sweat. It gets bloody hot in that thing, he chuckled, leading Sherbet through several more sections of the building before finally heading down a set of stairs into a dark cellar. I usually use this room for categorizing various mushroom species, since it's the perfect environment, David explained, lighting a gas lamp which he retrieved from a table outside the door. But at the rate at which this mold seems to spread, I needed to move many of those to a separate basement. Honestly, if this keeps up, I might have to build it its own room entirely. Or you could just grow less of it, Sherbet suggested. David laughed at the suggestion, and for some inexplicable reason the sound made the hair on the back of Sherbet's neck stand on end. It was harsher than David's usual laugh. "Ah, you're funny, Sherbet. Could you imagine wanting to do that? I mean, just look at it." As David opened the door, it became immediately obvious why so much space had been devoted to the mold. Beginning in the series of glass pallets Sherbet had sent, placed neatly on a desk in the corner, the fungus had spread from its casing in great heaps of mass, spilling out onto the desk and stretching out to the walls, climbing in every direction. Magnificent, swirling, writhing patterns of purple rot glistened with an oily sheen in the flickering light of David's lantern. The thick tendrils of darkness which clung to the walls and ceiling seemed to pulsate and shift with every twitch of the dancing light, the shadows only magnifying the unsettling display. The damp scent of decay assaulted Sherbet's nostrils, and they could feel the heavy air settle on the walls of their throat as they breathed it in, stifling a cough. It was no stretch of the imagination to conclude that this had indeed infected Ray with its twisting spores, and an instinct buried deep in Sherbet's subconscious urged them to run. The longer they stood, however, taking in the room, the more their mind calmed, the fear steadily slipping further away into the recesses of their mind. The longer they looked at the patterns of the mold, the deeper their shallow breaths became. There was an undeniable beauty in the patterns formed by the mold's growth. A wild, untamed tapestry of natural art stretched across the walls of David's home. "Dear God," Sherbet muttered, peering into the gloom. They remained standing in the doorway as David calmly waltzed into the space. "You may need a professional to clear this out." "Clear it out?" David laughed that unsettling laugh, turning back to face Sherbet. "Gods, no, I don't intend to do that at all. This environment makes it perfect to study. Did you realize this substance doesn't react like any other mold or fungus known to man?" David was grinning ear to ear. "Or at least none that I can find in any of my agricultural studies. It's entirely unique in its biological makeup, and especially in its growth pattern. I mean, look at these." David crouched down where the mold had overtaken the floor and ran his fingers gently across the patterns. Sherbet flinched as the man's skin made contact with the mold. "Whatever it is Ray has found for us, it's unlike anything seen in England. Possibly anything even seen on Earth. Other than, of course..." David stood back up, failing to finish his sentence and scratching at his neck as his voice trailed off. For a brief moment in the flickering lamplight, Sherbet swore they could see tendrils of the mold spreading across David's chest, flowering in the shadows of his muscles and mingling with the veins of his hands. But no, it was merely a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the wavering flame of the lantern. It was nothing to be concerned about, Sherbet was sure. David was an expert within his field. He knew what he was doing. He would be careful, looking for any kind of contamination. And there was nothing to suggest the infection of Ray's eye was anything more than a simple case of a foreign particle in a sensitive and exposed area of the human body. Molds didn't exactly grow on humans naturally, Sherbet reasoned. The thought brought them little comfort. "Fascinating," Sherbet nodded half-heartedly, eyeing the substance on the walls warily and breathing in the musty, rot-laced atmosphere. "About a sample, however, for my research?" David nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, plenty of it to spare, as you can see," he chuckled, spinning around to face a separate desk, which Sherbet was relieved to see was empty of the mold, bar some snaking veins which had twisted up around its legs, as if trying to claw their way up onto its surface. David retrieved a small wooden case and strode back across the room, handing it to Sherbet. 4 samples, in varying stages of development. He smiled, perhaps a little too widely. "I hope they're of use to you. I would hate to see Ray suffer any more because of this infection." David's tone did little to convey his apparent concern. "Of course," Sherbet nodded. "And if you ever need any kind of treatment yourself, should the substance cause any ill effects..." "Oh, nonsense," David waved the concern aside. "I'm in perfect health. If anything, my health has been improved by all this. It really..." The man hesitated, tilting his head to the side slightly, as if hearing distant music far away on a non-existent wind. "It really clears the mind, I feel. Brings one into the present." Yes, I'm sure it does," Sherbet forced a smile. I should get going." Thank you, David. I'm sure I'll see you again soon. Stop by any time. You're always welcome, my friend. David remained in the room as Sherbet let themselves out, turning to stare at the dancing patterns of mould, the darkness eventually consuming him as Sherbet disappeared upstairs and the gas lantern flickered out.